IB Nation Sports Talk up and rolling on a Tuesday with a freshly coiffed Jesse Stiers. I'm Sean Stiers.
I didn't even
Looking
know
fresh.
coiffed is a word. What does coiffed even mean?
You'll have to get out your thesaurus and check it out, I guess.
We're salty when you need him. He's usually like grammar and dictionary,
He's here.
everything.
He's here. He can give you a ruling, I think, if you need one.
It would be much appreciated.
Yeah. Well, Jesse's got a basketball game to coach later on tonight. We haven't talked hoops in a couple of weeks. Do your youngsters are you in the W column yet?
No.
Still fighting for that first W, huh?
0-4, still fighting for our first W. The last 2 weeks, though, I told you we played those like AAU travel teams that are part of our league for some reason. So those games really was about just playing as best as we could. The first 2 games that we lost, those were the harder ones.
Just follow John's advice. No technical fouls. Okay.
The referee came up to me after the game this past Saturday and says, "It's always a pleasure seeing you on Saturday."
Do you believe that he actually
No, there
means
was
that?
all sarcasm. All sarcasm.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure. How old is he? Like, is he older than you?
Oh,
About your
yeah,
age?
he's older than you.
Oh, wow.
He's probably a grandpa
So
to
he's
me.
been abused for a long time. If he's
Yeah.
been
And he
roughed
doesn't
up
like
that
my
way.
abuse for some reason. It seems like everyone else says something to him and it's fine, but when I say something, it becomes a big deal sometimes.
Yeah. All right. Well, good luck with your matchup tonight. We got a lot to get to. Notre Dame men's basketball picked up a dub in the first round of the ACC tournament today. We'll get to that and Marcus Burton's snubbing. Both Marcus Burton and Marcus Freeman will actually come up in rapid fire today, as will, wait for it, the quarterbacks a week from tomorrow. Spring practice begins. So we're on the verge. We're on the verge. We'll talk some
That's
Notre
the
Dame
least
quarterbacks.
important thing of next Wednesday. Come on now.
Oh, that's true. March 19th, the one and only, my firstborn, celebrates a birthday. Freshly coiffed. So, how important is the future of the Notre Dame-USC football rivalry? This is a topic, of course, that's popped up a few times over the last, I don't know, year or two, whatever it's been since. I mean, USC is in its first season in the Big Ten. They leave the Pac-12 for the Big Ten. It's come up again because USC athletic director Jen Cohen did a recent interview with the USC writer from The Athletic. And here's what Cohen said when asked about the future of the Notre Dame USC football series. This is a quote. "It's such an important series to our fans and both universities. I've said this before, and I'll say it again. In an ideal world, we're going to keep playing each other. With that being said, the landscape has changed dramatically. We're now playing in a conference where we fly back and forth across the country every other week. And CFP expansion and how you get access to the CFP and how things are seeded and selected. Those, to me, are important unanswered questions. So we remain in conversations with Notre Dame about this series. I think we're clear to each other that we're going to continue to evaluate what's best, and it's my job to evaluate what's best for our student athletes and our program. As we keep doing that, we're excited to go back to South Bend next year." End of quote. And again, that is USC Athletic Director Jen Cohen. So, Jesse, when you hear that from the USC perspective, how confident are you that the Notre Dame USC series is going to continue going forward?
If I had to put this on a scale of 1 to 10, I think I would put it at 5 out of 10, meaning it's pretty much a toss-up, a 50-50 chance. Based off that kind of quote that you were just going through, there's a lot of contradictions in there, in my opinion. She talks about flying back and forth across the country every other week. Well, what's the difference between doing that and doing that for Notre Dame, essentially, right? Like you're already doing that. And then, to kind of go a little bit further, it seems like when you start talking about the expansion and then being in the Big Ten, it's almost like they're saying, well, we already have a hard enough time with our Big Ten schedule.
Yeah.
We play you out of conference, Notre Dame, consistently. You could probably say top 10 school every season. And, you just came off a national championship as well. So I understand, the side of things where you don't want to overload your schedule, but at the same time, all of these wounds are self-inflicted. You took the money to go to the Big Ten.
Exactly. I mean, at the end of the day, that's what it comes down to, is they were more than willing to take those checks and go to the Big Ten, but now it's going to, so like, oh, we're willing to take the checks because, okay, maybe we've got to go to Rutgers every other year. We've got to go to Maryland every other year. And I mean, honestly, it doesn't even add up to that because, as we all found out, they're not playing balanced schedules in the Big Ten Conference. You're not playing every team. So it's not even an every other year situation. Now, do they have to go east? Of course they do. But again, the school was more than willing to sign up for it. And look, we've had guys from, who cover USC on this program plenty of times. And it's something, that I've talked about with them. And from their perspective, like the game that fills the LA Coliseum consistently is every other Thanksgiving weekend when Notre Dame comes to town. That's the hottest ticket that USC football has. And, that's it's even bigger. It sounds like than USC UCLA is when Notre Dame comes out there, because obviously they play UCLA every year. Right now they play Notre Dame every year, but both USC and UCLA are going to be played in the greater Los Angeles metro area. Obviously UCLA is out in Pasadena, but TD4ND says replace Notre Dame with Rutgers. So again, like, I'm right with you. To me, it sounds like 50-50 at best. Like they are really going to sit on this and probably, go for a couple of cycles, see what it looks like, see where they are in the college football playoff conversation, kind of weigh what the extra travel actually means for them, and then make some kind of decision going forward. And, look, a lot of rivalries have gone by the wayside because of the fact of all this conference expansion that we've had across college football in the last few years.
Yeah, and I think that's important to note because no one's going to feel bad or no one's going to be like, oh, well, we can't keep this going because of some long-standing rivalry or tradition that's already kind of been in place. Listen, the matter of the fact is, if it doesn't make dollars and it doesn't make, USC's chances of making the playoffs better, then they're not going to do it. It's not just going to, just because it's tradition and rivalry isn't going to save this thing, because we've already seen some of those, old long-standing tradition rivalries go away due to teams, going to new conferences, basically. So in my opinion, it would suck to see, because I do believe that it is, Notre Dame's kind of more longer standing rivalry. But
yeah, so that's kind of the next, the whole topic of the show is how important is this. So, I mean, let's do it from Notre Dame's perspective, because I agree with what Andrew is saying. It may be important to Notre Dame, but not so important to USC, or at least it doesn't sound that important to USC. From the Notre Dame perspective, and even from a greater macro college football perspective, how important is it to keep a series like this going forward?
Yeah, so like on a more micro level, this impacts Notre Dame far more than it does USC because of one reason. And this is kind of, there's pros and cons to everything that you do. And one of the cons of not being in a conference is you don't have those traditional year in, year out rivalries that conferences give you. Like,
you've got to set your own up. Yeah.
Right. And so they're inorganic. Some Michigan, Ohio State, that's an organic rivalry. USC, UCLA, that was an organic rivalry just because of, relative location. Michigan State, Auburn, Alabama, those are kind of, organic rivalries. Notre Dame, they become inorganic because not only are you not in a conference, but you're not in a state that also produces high-end football either. Like Indiana football, not great. Purdue football, not great. So how can you create rivalries on that front when you're not in a conference and the in-state teams are really not that great traditionally at football either? So I think more on a micro level, this impacts Notre Dame more than anything.
I agree. And, look, like it wasn't that long ago, but it's only been 11, 12 years ago, I guess, pre the Notre Dame ACC arrangement. Notre Dame was playing year in and year out. They were playing not only USC and Navy, but they were playing Michigan State. They were playing Purdue. Like those were, like everyone talks about the Notre Dame Michigan rivalry, and it's obviously, from a more marquee perspective, it was a big rivalry. But in comparison, Purdue and Michigan State actually had a longer running annual rivalry with Notre Dame than even Michigan had. And like you go back before that, you had a very intense rivalry in the 80s and early 90s with the Miami Hurricanes before, that series was basically just, like booted off the schedule because it just became, it became too much. There was too much bitterness and, too much of that kind of stuff going on. But college sports, one of the foundations of college sports is having these rivalries, because unlike pro sports where you can sort of attach yourself, and I guess, obviously in college you can attach yourself as well, but you have alumni bases and you have fan bases. And like this one, Notre Dame-USC goes so far back, like all the way, like you can draw the line, obviously, all the way back to Knute Rockne when he started this thing. But I guess my point is Notre Dame has already lost. When you look at the importance of Notre Dame has already lost so many of these old traditional rivalries. This is the oldest and most important. So to lose this would just, like it's like when you talk about tradition and, everything else that comes with Notre Dame. Well, this is one of those traditions. This is one of those important traditions. So it would be, I mean, would it be catastrophic? No. At the end of the day, the world goes on. But at the same time, I think you need to, because like Notre Dame Navy is more just about the actual tradition / honor, whatever, because of, repaying the debt for World War II and that thing. But like this is like in terms of significant football rivalries, this one matters. And I think it would be really bad for Notre Dame. I think it'd be really bad for the sport if it were to go by the wayside.
And I think what makes this a true rivalry in comparison to what you were just talking about is both teams have a long-standing tradition of excellence on the football level, producing national champions.
Heisman's and national champions. Yeah.
All-Americans, all, people who go on and have great pro careers as well. So like this is taking away good football. This is taking away good exposure of players. And that's what makes a rivalry is a rivalry isn't a team that just comes in and beats the snot out of the team every year consistently, year after year after year. A rivalry is two good teams that are always, considered to be relevant top of the sport, and they're battling it out every year. And sometimes USC wins and sometimes Notre Dame goes on streaks, but those teams are always good teams, ranked teams most of the times, and their games have significance or impact at the end of the day.
That's absolutely right. There's a couple comments that I wanted to get here. DK said Miami joined the ACC. They actually joined the Big East first. Don't forget that. They were in the Big East in the 90s before they went to the ACC. So DK, wrong again. Mike says he really doesn't care. He's all about the playoff now. I mean, that's a thing.
So is that a conversation? Are we okay with exchanging rivalries for home playoff games or playoff games in general? Because there's going to be more of them now, right? And so it's like, is it kind of just swapping now? If you get in, those replace those kind of big rivalry regular season games?
I mean, I think that there's at least some people who would agree. I would guess. I mean, we're probably the right, sort of cross demographic to be talking about. Like you're younger, so do you care as much about this rivalry versus college football playoff appearances?
I mean, if I had to pick, I'd rather make the playoff than beat USC.
Right. I mean, like if that's your choice, I think anyone's going to take that. But
what has more? I mean, I think the college football games, postseason games, have more significance overall, and so I don't want to see the USC and Notre Dame rivalry go away. I consider it Notre Dame's biggest rival because of what we just talked about in terms of where the programs are historically and what they've kind of continued to do over the last 20 to 25 years. Like I when I think of Notre Dame and who their toughest, most rivaled opponent is, it's USC. And so to lose that and to lose the lineage of all the great players, to go through that rivalry and play each other and go on and have success, I think it's a huge loss. But unfortunately, those are the repercussions of where college football is headed. And I would rather, go to that Notre Dame and Indiana game at home in the playoffs than potentially go to the Notre Dame and USC game during the regular season.
Sure.
That has more importance to me. So would it suck to see it leave? Of course, but I mean, business is business, and you got to keep winning playoff games. And last time I checked, USC is further away from the playoff than Notre Dame is. And so I think that's kind of the flip side of this,
which is probably part of their, it's like, oh, Notre Dame's in the playoff. They've been in the playoffs 3 times. We've never been to the play. We've got to get there.
Right.
Does keeping Notre Dame around actually help us get to that goal? And at least for the short term right now, or it's even a little bit longer term when you consider Notre Dame's been to the playoff 3 times since 2018. Like the answer is no, it doesn't help USC having Notre Dame on the schedule.
Right. And so why do you think, it's not a coincidence that USC poached Chad Bowden is either, because of what you just talked about. Like Notre Dame's been there 3 times. USC hasn't. USC is in California, a very talent-rich area for recruiting. Notre Dame is in the middle of the Midwest and, have cold winters and snow, but they can still find recruits to come out and get them to the playoffs and to a national championship. And so it's like, if you're USC and, probably your biggest rival too is having all of this success in your face, why would you want to continue to be a part of that? I guess maybe not be a part of it, but why would you fight extra hard to stay
to keep it? Yeah.
Why would you not just be like, oh, well, here's some excuses, and if it dies out, it dies out. But why would we fight to continue to watch our biggest rival beat us and have more success than us in the postseason? So I think it makes sense at the end of the day, as much as the whole situation
from
sucks,
the USC perspective is what you're saying. Yeah.
And the repercussions that would come of it on both sides.
Andrew says, for all its problems, the NFL does give us games that we want to see every week. College football needs to follow suit. College football is like boxing teams avoiding each other. And, again, like that's why it feels like both of these schools need to hang on to each. You can make the argument like from USC's perspective, because someone brought up the recruiting Southern California aspect of it. And, being out there on the West Coast, that definitely benefits Notre Dame, whereas USC is on the West Coast. They don't need to worry about traveling to the West Coast to get out there. They're in a talent, a hotbed of talent. But since Pete Carroll left, they've been really inconsistent with recruiting it. And that's why, you bring up Bowden. But I mean, I agree with Andrew's point. Like one thing that conference expansion did give this year is, okay, you added Texas and Oklahoma to the SEC, and that did create some extra matchups we weren't getting before. Just like we're talking about trying to preserve rivalries, Texas going to the SEC actually restored a rivalry with Texas A&M that
Right.
they hadn't played each other prior to that. It actually brought that rivalry back, so we got that. But it did create at least a handful of games Ohio State and Oregon being one. Like when you look at, like Andrew is saying, games that we want to see, the Big Ten expansion, obviously. But other than that, like Ohio State, Michigan was still one of the bigger ones. Yeah, I mean, Archer says it ended Bedlam. I mean, Oklahoma State not nearly as vital to the national college football conversation as Red River, though, right? Like, as much as, like, if you live in the state of Oklahoma or you're a fan of one of those programs, yeah, it would definitely suck that Bedlam ended. But you do still have Red River with Texas and Oklahoma being around.
See,
Go ahead.
This is just the whole reason why the Big Ten and the SEC are crying for an extra playoff spot already, because this is like prime example A. Oh, we're USC. We got to play in the Big Ten now, and now we have to play Notre Dame out at a conference on top of that. Like, okay, no one feels bad for you because no one forced you to make these mega.
You did it for the money. You did it for the money, and now you're complaining about extra travel. Like, you didn't have any conversations about the fact, wow, we're in Los Angeles. If we do this, we've got to fly 3 time zones away for a good chunk of our games, to play these games. Like, no one thought about that in advance. No one thought about, any of these different things. It's just using those as excuses is just all it is. It's just a big excuse. And you're right. Nobody feels sorry for them. Christopher says, can we get Michigan State back on the schedule? Now, they are going to rotate on the schedule here in a few years. But, that kind of leads me
here we go
into one of my I've got several different follow-ups. So if USC were to go off the schedule, who would you want to see replace them on the schedule?
So this is an actual easy question for me, because we know Notre Dame is about what? The Subway Series, right? Like, Notre Dame wants to hit all parts of the country. They want all of their fans to be able to see it. And so I think you have to geographically kind of stay in the same area. And I think it kind of makes sense in terms of recruiting as well. So, when you're looking at the West Coast, who really presents themselves as relevant football competition outside of USC? You have Stanford, UCLA, Washington, and Oregon.
Right.
I think you can get rid of Stanford for obvious reasons. UCLA because they really just aren't good at football consistently.
Well, but they're also in the Big Ten as well, and they've got, they're in worse financial situation than USC. So are they going to want to, partake in a series where they've got to come to Indiana every other year?
So I think what makes sense when you get down to it is the likes of a like Washington or Oregon, because I think if you're Notre Dame, you still want to kind of keep that kind of quality opponent on your schedule. That's another kind of disadvantage or, negative for Notre Dame in this situation is USC, again, is predominantly considered a relevant school, and it always looks good on Notre Dame's resume when they can check that they beat USC that year. And so I think you have to find, kind of similar program pedigree combined with staying out in that area for what we talked about, fan reasons, recruiting reasons. So I don't know. I think Washington or Oregon would be pretty fun at the end of the day.
Yeah, I guess the question would be, do you even replace them with one team, or do you just do what Notre Dame is doing with some of these others, and you put like an Oregon on for 2 years or Washington on for 2 years? Sly Fox says no thanks to Washington. Like, do you just, or like DK is saying, play more in Texas, Florida, in Georgia? Do you try to get the Gators on the schedule?
I wouldn't mind those.
Yeah.
But again, I think you have to stay in like one of those hotbed markets,
right?
Like Texas,
but again,
Florida.
do you just rotate through and add them? But the thing is, you're going to probably have to add more. You're either going to have to add, teams from the upper tier, like we're talking about, Texas, Florida, Georgia, as well as some lower tier teams, I'm just throwing this out there. I know Vanderbilt was better this year, but like the Vandies or whoever it happens to be, like to balance it
Baylor.
out, because as it is right now, you're already going out and you're playing the Georgias and Texas, and you got Alabama coming on the schedule in the future, but you also currently have USC penciled in to your rotation. So if you take USC out, that means you're going to have to add another team on top, like you've got to obviously replace USC in addition to whatever sort of marquee games that you've already got scheduled out there. If this were Vince would say no way to what I'm about to float out there. Like, the obvious answer is more Michigan, right? Like, if Michigan, because we're talking about rivalries.
If you really want to restore that rivalry aspect, Michigan is the next best answer.
I mean, doesn't it feel like if you're like you need to have at least a traditional rival on
right, and that's why I don't like the idea of rotating teams in 2 years, 2 off, or rotating through California, Texas. I think you need to establish someone and consistently play them. And if we're talking about who would be the next best answer, Michigan also has a great lineage in terms of all pros, Heisman's, national championships, all those good things, draft picks. And it's someone that you already have a good amount of history with as well. And would, depending on who you ask, not Vince D'Addario, Notre Dame fans would consider Michigan to be a rival.
So I've got a couple they are definitely, like, even though Notre Dame hasn't played them in a few years, and it's going to be a few more until they play them again, I mean, it is a rivalry. There is natural hatred. And, like I've always thought, just like when you look at the geography of the whole thing, rivals tend to be much more close in proximity than Notre Dame and USC.
And that's kind of the argument I was going with the in-state thing with, Purdue and Indiana. That's where it sucks for Notre Dame as well. There's no teams close by in-state that are good. But okay, why don't we just start? I mean, let's if we're talking Michigan, why not throw Ohio State in that conversation at this point?
Somebody mentioned Ohio State, and they've obviously rotated Ohio State on and off. I'm going to kind of throw these two things together here, because what if, if USC's biggest issue is, well, we don't want to always be traveling every other year. So what if you just, instead of making it an annual rivalry, what if you went 2 years on, 2 years off? Would that be bad from a Notre Dame perspective if you rotated USC on and off the schedule on a 2-year sort of revolving basis? So you're saying, hey, we'll help you out a little bit here. We want to keep this going. That means, if you do it, on a 2-year revolving basis, so you play him 2 years, then you're off 2 years, then you play him 2 years, you're off 2 years. Then everyone who comes through the door for either program would make at least one visit to the other school, right? Mm-hmm. So you're still part of that whole thing. What do you think of that?
So on paper, I think it's a great solution, and it's probably something that Notre Dame would present. I just feel like USC is using that as their crutch. You know what I mean? I think that they have more bigger logistical issues rather than just wanting, and I think they're covering up by saying, oh, we don't want to make all these extra travel arrangements. But if you're USC and that's truly the thing that's holding you back, then of course I think that would make, a lot of sense, because then you're obviously cutting out, a trip every 4 years between the, home and home type situation. And like you said as well, what if you started moving these to, some of more neutral sites or more.
Save that for a second. Because I've got something.
Hold that thought.
Part of this 2 on 2 off. This is more from the Notre Dame perspective, but if USC would want to do something like that, 2 on 2 off, what if you're Notre Dame Okay, now again, you've got a hole to fill in the schedule because USC is going to be off, for 2 straight years. What if you alternated 2 years against USC, 2 years against Michigan, 2 years against, and you rotate it like that going forward? So you keep both USC and Michigan on the schedule on at least a somewhat regular basis. Well, I mean, they would all be on the schedule on a regular basis. They just wouldn't be annual. What do you think about that? So you play
I think
USC.
that's the best solution for all parties involved.
I feel like it as well.
Because if you're USC, you get out of it, basically you're now at a 50% reduction. Every 4 years you're playing 2 games instead of 4 games. And then if you're Notre Dame, you fill that void by adding your rival, because that's what Michigan is to Notre Dame. It's their rival. And so now you've continued, you've basically filled that void with the next best solution, because Michigan is also a good football team.
Yeah. And
a long-standing tradition, and you fill the rival void.
Yeah. And these are, as Andrew says, NBC would love that idea. I mean, if one, the NBC is, NBC is part of the Big Ten package now. Exactly, so there are other opportunities for NBC to get Notre Dame on its air other than just when these teams come to Notre Dame. Now, there's still like a draft process and all that stuff, in terms of figuring out who gets what games and all that kind of thing. But like at a very minimum, if you did this, 2 years of USC, 2 years of Michigan, and then you just rotate that going forward, then NBC is guaranteed to have Notre Dame playing one of those 2 traditional rivals basically every year. You're going to get one of them. Yeah. They're going to get either Notre Dame USC or Notre Dame Michigan at Notre Dame Stadium every year if you did something like that. I mean, and I don't know, how I know Michigan keeps trying to, pin the whole thing on Notre Dame with chicken dances and all that different kind of stuff, but like they would still have to be up for it. But like it just feels like a natural fit to me for everybody. Like something like that would be perfect if you could do that. Like that might even be the better way to go than, like if you would have to get the interest from the Michigan side. But to me, that's kind of more exciting. Again, if this is Vince, he's going to tell you absolutely not, because he wants nothing to do with Michigan. But I would love to see that. And Josh is obviously in the same boat. He doesn't want to go the Michigan route either. I would love to see that come back. Like those were some of
I
the
enjoy
most
more of the
intense,
regional aspect of things.
Yeah, because again, like if you live in this area, there are plenty of Michigan fans who live in and around South Bend, just like Purdue and Michigan State and IU fans and on and on and on. There's a lot of those people who live around here, and like to me, that rivalry was much more fun than either Purdue or Michigan State. Like when they did play at least a little bit more regularly, that was a lot more fun. Mike says play all of the natural rivals, all of them. And see, I don't like this because again, like you do need a broader, sort of stroke when you're talking about who you're scheduling and where you're going. I just like it did feel like when you had Purdue and Michigan State both on the schedule, and then again there wasn't always an annual thing, but Michigan was on there at least semi-regularly as well. It just became a much more Midwestern schedule, and I didn't enjoy that as much. I at least like it where they're going to different parts of the country, and obviously, they continue to go out to California every year. So DK says you're a closet Wolverine.
Yeah, I lived in Michigan for like 5 or 6 years. Doesn't make me a Michigan fan.
He's got a lot of Michigan fan friends.
That's very true.
Yeah. So again, Jen Cohen, the USC athletic director, kind of started this with the comments, and that's, was kind of the launching point to this conversation. And she talks about the issues with travel, which again, self-imposed inconvenience, that they didn't care about when they signed up to take those Big Ten paychecks. But what if they made, so, again, what if Notre Dame says, well, okay, you don't want to travel out here to the Midwest all the time. What if they made Notre Dame-USC a neutral site game? You started playing in places like Las Vegas. You go to, what is it, Scottsdale, or, Phoenix, wherever that stadium is now. I think it's in Scottsdale, right?
You're talking about the Cardinals Stadium?
Where the Cardinals play, yeah. Santa Clara, where the 49ers play, like NFL stadiums, more, a little bit more to the west. Like, what do you think of neutral site possibility?
The neutral site stuff, again, I feel like just really only benefits, someone like USC. It's just kind of, Notre Dame would kind of be lending its hand, I guess you could say, to make the matchup more appeasing. And then I think at some point Notre Dame might have to compromise Shamrock Series, or, maybe the USC game becomes a Shamrock Series in some way. So now you've got, recruits on both sides for Notre Dame and USC, because I think USC would enjoy something like that as well. More exposure, more recruits, all that good stuff. So I think, as a fan who would, want to go to a game and go to a cool stadium and enjoy this experience, yeah, it would be great. But at the end of the day, I don't think it does Notre Dame any favors, and I think it would only benefit more so, USC. So that's where it's kind of tough, because, like, again, as a fan, you love when they go to play at these cool places, and maybe it's nearby to you so you can go. But then on the flip side, again, it's like it's just USC who's really, feeling all of the rewards from something like that.
Right. I guess it's a matter of how much does Notre Dame want to bend over to help out the rival at the end of the day. And I tend to agree, but at the same time, again, like if you made this a 3-year revolving deals, kind of deal. So you go in Los Angeles, in South Bend, neutral site, and then you rotate back through like that. So like every 3rd year, you've got a neutral site game. You're doing something different with it. Now, Notre Dame obviously already has the Shamrock Series, but again, like if at least right now anyway, the biggest complaint / excuse is, hey, we don't want all this travel because we're already traveling in the Big Ten. Feels like you play in a neutral, in an NFL stadium out west someplace. It's not bad, right?
Not bad at all.
I'm looking at the places. So USC, interesting. Wow. USC is going to play. Here's their first 3 road games: at Purdue, at Illinois, at Notre Dame. And then they play at Nebraska as well. And then their only other road game is at Oregon. So they've actually, not a whole lot of road games, but that's a pretty good, it's definitely a pretty good Midwestern concentration when you're going at Illinois, at Purdue, at Notre Dame.
And again, like that's why I'm not buying the travel argument, because you're already going to Illinois and Purdue. What's the difference between South Bend at that point? It's just the extra trip that they don't want to do unless they're mandated to do because of their conference obligations at the end of the day. So again, I'm not really buying that the whole travel thing is an excuse. You just don't want to travel when you don't have to. If the Big Ten is telling you you got to travel, then it's no big deal.
Last season, they went to Michigan, they went to Minnesota, they went to Maryland, and then they played at Washington, at UCLA. So, I mean, that's this. It doesn't feel like the Big Ten's not going to make things completely brutal on these West Coast teams. They're trying to make it as manageable as possible. Antoine says he wants Notre Dame to play Ohio State more, along with Oregon, Georgia Tech, Miami, Texas A&M, Michigan, and Michigan State.
That's a lot of schools to play.
Yeah. And I mean, the only, like those ACC schools, obviously, that's going to be up to the ACC in terms of how much more often Notre Dame ends up playing them. Josh says Notre Dame versus Clemson has grown into a rivalry. I mean, I don't know if it's quite there yet. If they start playing more regularly, like is supposed to happen, then I think maybe it kind of blossoms there. I mean, I don't know. Do you like? I don't consider them a rival by any means right now. I consider them another good football team that Notre Dame happens to play every few years right now. How about you?
Yeah, I don't consider them quite a rival yet. But I think it's trajecting in that direction.
Trajecting in that direction?
Yes.
Okay.
Tracking in that direction?
So for you, and I think we're in the same boat on this. Like, we started off what our confidence is that this series actually continues. And again, this is more based on the USC side of things, because I think if Notre Dame had its way, this series would just continue infinitely, right? But I think that our confidence that it continues, based on the comments from the USC athletic director, we're 50-50 right now.
Yes.
But in terms of wanting it to continue, again, like the question came up, keep USC or make college football playoff appearances. I mean, if that's the alternative, then everyone's going to take making the college football playoff. But leaving the college football playoff out of it, is it 10? It's 10 out of 10 for me that I want Notre Dame USC to continue, if at all possible. Is that what it would be for you?
Yeah, it would be a 10 out of 10 for me because of a lot of the stuff that we're talking about earlier in terms of, how long Notre Dame and USC have played each other, how many national champions, All-Americans, Heismans, draft picks have come out. Like, these are two highly regarded football programs with a lot of history. And so I love that it's a rivalry game because every year the game means something, right? Like, and I think that's the biggest part of the rivalries that are still, going on in college football. And like, look at Michigan and Ohio State, for example, this season. Both teams are completely satisfied with their seasons. Obviously, Ohio State is, because they won a national championship. Michigan is too, coming off a national championship, losing a lot of their players, losing a lot of their coaches to the NFL, but they still found a way to beat Ohio State. And why is that? Because that's their biggest rivalry. That's the game that everyone cares about between those two programs. And so that's the type of stuff. It's just so crazy to see both sides, where one team went like 7-5 and the other team won a national championship. But because of this rivalry, how much it shaped about how they feel about the season. And I think that's, as a fan, that's what you want to consistently chase, or feel like those type of games have impacts, even though you might not be, national championship bound for the season, or maybe you are, but you still can't get over the hurdle of your rival.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Christopher says we play in Cali once a year, so let's find other Cali schools to play. I mean, unfortunately, there just aren't enough other viable
UCLA,
options,
Stanford,
right?
Fresno State.
Yeah, they already play Stanford. So, I mean, honestly, it's like, San Diego State's not going to do anything for you.
Shoot, just go to Arizona State at that point.
Yeah. True. Very true. Joseph says not just Jen Cohen. Lincoln Riley doesn't want Notre Dame on the schedule either. I mean, and that's where it started, was last year when Riley made the comments. But Cohen carries a lot more power. Because she's Lincoln Riley's boss. So, but I get what you're saying. I get the point. Some of this has probably trickled up to her from him, for that matter. Because like the whole thing came up, remember, when they were playing LSU, and I think he was asked about LSU, and I think he brought up the Notre Dame stuff independently of that. So I don't know. Like to me, it feels like, well, if you're going to play in the Big Ten, now obviously the LSU series was scheduled before, joining the Big Ten came up, but feels pretty simple. Like, just don't put more SEC teams on your schedule going forward, and keep your rival, because that's a game that matters to your fan base, and it matters to the other fan base, and it gets people talking nationally about it, especially if both teams are ranked, which has happened a lot of times. Mike says we froze up. Maybe it's you that froze up, Mike. Because I don't know, we're still talking to each other. So if we're talking to each other, that means that neither one of us are frozen, right?
Yeah, usually the issues come when one of us is frozen and the other isn't. So it must be, if we're all good, then it must be a you problem, unfortunately.
By the way, Salty says that your team needs to test the coaching market. Go out and find a coach who can bring some dubs in.
Unfortunately, our issues run much deeper than that.
You're saying you need to go out and recruit?
I'm saying that we have an infatuation with shooting threes like we're Steph Curry. And
oh boy. I mean, that's
close.
like a basketball disease, isn't it? Like everyone just wants to shoot threes these days.
Well, not only that, but they want to dribble like they're Kyrie Irving. They want to shoot like they're Steph Curry. And so no one has a grasp of fundamentals. And it's like they play basketball, they watch basketball, but then I swear, I mean, I have a kid that doesn't even know if he's on defense or offense some of the time. And it's like, what is even going on right now? So yeah, our issues run deeper than that, but we've gotten better, and that's all that matters.
That's right. That's all you can ask. Youngsters, start of the season, end of the season, did they get better? That's all you can ask for, right?
And I have like 2 kids who listen to exactly what I say and drill the drills that we do, and they've gotten a lot better. And I just start them now because they might not be the most talented, but they'll at least listen to me and get back in transition on defense and do what they're supposed to.
On that subject, how has the how is the kid who is pretty talented but doesn't necessarily focus? Like, has his focus and work gotten any better since the inquiry from above? No, not at all.
No. And he had a great practice, but then we got to the game and it was back to deer in the headlights. So I was like, I don't know what to do at this point. Luckily in the games, it's like people are there. So like you could pretty much see like if your kid is all that.
Joseph asks if the decision lies solely with Jen Cohen, the USC athletic director. It would seem the significance would transcend beyond the AD. I think you're right. You know, like big picture decisions like this, I would think that her boss, the president, would also, you know, the USC president would also be involved, because this would be really maybe not quite to the extent of USC leaving the Pac-12 for the Big Ten, but like this would be just a couple rungs below that, I think, on the importance ladder in terms of decisions that you would make if you're USC. Because again, if you're USC football, you've never been in the college football playoff so far. You're going on a couple decades since you were last competing for / winning national championships. So like, what other than playing Notre Dame, what brings the most attention to USC football right now? I don't think there is anything else. Is there?
It's definitely not playing Illinois in the middle of November.
No.
Or Purdue in September off of their horrible season.
Yeah.
I mean, the only thing that's relevant for USC right now is Notre Dame and being good in the Big Ten, but they're not good in the Big Ten. They didn't compete for a Big Ten championship. They didn't compete for a college football playoff spot. So if you're USC fans, why are you inclined to go across the country and watch USC play Maryland, Nebraska, Minnesota? You're not, but at least if you know they're playing at Notre Dame, you know what comes with that. And again, what we talked about, even if you're having a horrible season and you're the Michigans of this past season and you find a way to beat your rival during a great year, that reconciles a lot of the other stuff or failures or shortcomings that happens throughout the season. And so that's an aspect of it for USC that they have to think of as well. And then, like you said, the flip, when they come back home, they're not going to draw a bigger crowd or gate fee than what they would get when Notre Dame comes to town. So
That's right.
really, what are you gaining at the end of the day if you're not playing in a Big Ten championship consistently year in and year out?
Absolutely. Yeah, because I mean, like, Notre Dame comes to town, that's a premium ticket. You can, you can jack up the price of those tickets all you want, and there's going to be a big market for them. So, yeah. So it'll be, again, like we're going to keep getting these stories going forward. Really curious to see if USC would ever actually, come to that. But again, like, you look at their schedule, and especially, like if you're comparing it to what Notre Dame does with its own travel every year, it's no worse having to go, once across the country, couple times, 3 times to the Midwest. It's not that bad, ultimately.
Like, what was that stretch they had, I think 2 years ago, where they went from like New York to California to, somewhere
California
else?
twice. They went New York. They went to Southern California twice because they played Navy in San Diego. They played USC, in Los Angeles. They played Northwestern in Chicago. They played a home game, and yeah. So
no complaints. Like, that's the thing, is if you're USC and Notre Dame, you want that exposure, like you want to get into those markets that aren't, as geographically kind of close to you. And I think Notre Dame gets that message, but unless you're USC, and again, to me, it just comes down to they're bitter at the end of the day. Notre Dame's just been dominating this rivalry. They've made the playoff, 3 times. They were just in the national championship. They're recruiting better than USC. They're taking some of USC's homegrown recruits, and, those guys are having an impact on Notre Dame's team. And so you can't really make the excuse, because I think good programs like Notre Dame and Ohio State and Oregon, and they want that exposure. They want to go around the country and put their brand on display. And so it can all come down to, in my opinion, USC is just kind of embarrassed of where they are in comparison of their rival right now.
I think that's a big part of it. Yeah. Like, granted, they won a couple of years ago, but the last couple of years have looked a bit different. So,
but like, when has USC actually been on the national stage and done something relevant?
Pete Carroll was still the head coach.
Right.
That's when.
And Notre Dame has come up. They had those couple years of, they fell down a little bit into the valley a bit with Tyrone Willingham. They kind of came back up with Charlie Weiss, and then kind of from there took off. Like, Brian Kelly had shortcomings and lost to USC here and there, but really you can say since Brian Kelly, like, Notre Dame has handled its business in terms of beating USC and also having a more national success rate, being more relevant on a national level.
Yes. Check. Yes.
And even though Notre Dame, it finally took Notre Dame to actually win some of those big games this year. I mean, I'm not a fan of participation trophies at the end of the day, but Notre Dame was still in some of those games. Like, yes, they lost on some big games and some national, they lost in a national championship to Alabama. They lost to Clemson. They lost to Alabama. They've lost the New Year's 6 bowl games, but they're there. And that's like, USC is not even there yet. They haven't even come out of that trench or that hole that they've dug themselves into post Carroll. You went through the failed Lane Kiffin. You went through, some of these other failures at coach. You had to replace your athletic director. Like, that's not happening at Notre Dame. There's far more stability at Notre Dame as well. Notre Dame is getting themselves.
They've replaced multiple athletic directors and multiple head coaches. It's been a continuous cycle of bad stuff at USC, and I think that
it feeds into that embarrassment.
And I mean, it was part of their decision, I think, to take those Big Ten paychecks because they needed to make up for some of that. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Like, when you look at what Notre Dame is doing and what USC is doing, one has been a lot more consistent than the other. With all that, Jesse, Are you ready for rapid fire?
I hear Bailey in the background, so I think he's ready for some rapid fire.
Yes, getting louder, getting louder. It's funny that you can hear that in the other room because other people in this house never. I don't think they always believe me when I tell them that I can hear them in here. There's things going on.
I thought I'd back you up because if I can hear it, I know you can hear it.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So The Athletic ranked the top college football coaches in the country. Here's the ranking. I'll give you 1 through 10. Number 1, Kirby Smart. Number 2, Ryan Day. Number 3, Dabo Swinney. Number 4, Steve Sarkisian. Kalen DeBoer at 5, Marcus Freeman 6, Dan Lanning 7, James Franklin 8, Matt Campbell 9, Brian Kelly number 10. So do you buy or sell that list?
So here's what I'm going to do. I'm not really going to nitpick the order because I think that's irrelevant. But if I am going to pick the order, Ryan Day, definitely not number 2. That's the only order thing
That's what I feel like. It's like, okay, he finally won a national championship, and now all of a sudden he's second best in the country, only to Kirby Smart.
Not buying that.
I don't buy that either.
Is still above Ryan Day, in my opinion.
Yeah, I believe so as well. 1, because he's got multiple championships.
That's what I mean. 2, he built a dynasty there for like 5 years.
2, he might be having a hard time sort of adjusting to the modern world of college football right now, but you can't tell me he's not a better head coach. You know, like he doesn't have, I don't think Dabo Swinney and Clemson have people, you know, sinking $20+ million, you know, into keeping a roster together the way Ryan Day did last year. I don't think anybody else has that. Stymie, James Franklin was number 8. See if I can post this in the chat so that it.
See, like, I think James Franklin is a top 10 coach. He just can't win at the national level. And so, like, at that point, is he even worthy of being in your top 10? Because what's it matter if you can't win the big ones? So he's like right on the cusp of like 10, 11 for me. But I'll give him the benefit.
James Franklin is?
I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. Like,
but I mean, he still deserves to be ahead of Matt Campbell, right?
Yes. Matt Campbell's off my list. He's not in my list.
I like the Matt Campbell thing. If he was that good a coach, he wouldn't still be at Iowa State. I'm sorry. Like, you can't be like, he gets the most out of Iowa State. Like, you can only live on that for so long. It's like, get a premier job and compete for national championships if you're really that good a coach.
Well, the other thing is, how many actual titles has he won at Iowa State?
Right.
I don't think he has. I don't think he has
either. I don't think he's won a conference championship. Let me check it here real quick.
And so for that reason, too, I got to boot him out of there. I would feel more comfortable with Lane Kiffin than I would Matt Campbell.
I think so, too.
Lane Kiffin's
but again,
in my top 10.
Campbell is getting this reputation of more with less. Okay, so according to this, in 2020, which was the COVID season when there were fewer games, he did win the Big 12.
I'm not buying it that year.
Yeah. It's very easy. A lot easier to dismiss because they didn't, they played, well, I guess they still played 9 conference games that year. But yeah, so that's their only conference championship. Other than that, well, I guess he did. He couldn't have won. I guess he won the Big Ten regular season this past year. He obviously didn't win the Big Ten championship game because this says he was in first place in the conference. They obviously lost to Arizona State, though, because Arizona State is the team that, ended up playing in the college football playoff, not Iowa State. I'm a little, again, like we're arguing over spots, and like you said, you weren't going to argue that much about.
I just kind of wanted to peg 1 through 10. I don't care about. It's just kind of looking at that 10 who doesn't belong. Matt Campbell doesn't belong, in my opinion. And I'm not really sold on DeBoer either, to be honest with you.
That's where I was going.
Because he's got an NAIA championship and he made a national championship with Washington, but outside of that, he doesn't have a proven college track record. like the likes of Brian Kelly. Brian Kelly's overall record in college football is great when you look at it on paper. He's far more experienced than someone like DeBoer. And so I would be more comfortable with Brian Kelly, honestly, than I would DeBoer in this list.
Yeah, I actually think Kelly needs to be ahead of DeBoer, like especially like the way Notre Dame is talked about in terms of relevance and all those different things. Well, like, was anybody, was Washington having their relevance questioned every year when Kalen DeBoer was getting them, into the college football playoff and then a national championship game? Okay, did Washington, kind of regress after DeBoer left? Yeah, but they also had all this first round talent. They basically had most of their roster was gone. There was near complete turnover after he left. And then, was Alabama as good with Kalen DeBoer as Nick Saban? No, he wasn't. So I feel like Kalen DeBoer really for being a one-year wonder. And like you said, he did really well at the NAIA level, but I think it's a little bit too fast, too soon to be putting him among the elite in college football right now, like big time college football coaches on this list.
Definitely agree.
But, Marcus Freeman shows up on this after getting Notre Dame to the national championship game. I don't think he was even showing up in the top 20 on most of these lists last year. He was still like in that 25-30 range, I think, in most of those lists. So he's made a pretty huge jump. I can't tell if DK is actually being sarcastic or serious, saying that he agrees with you. Kelly should be number 2.
Marcus Freeman's first 3 years as a head coach and starting at a program like Notre Dame is still impressive on paper considering what they accomplished this last season. However, if you take out this last season and they have a finish like they did in the first 2 seasons, then no, Marcus Freeman doesn't belong on this list. But in year 3, he still beat Indiana, the SEC champ, the Big Ten runner-up, and lost in the national championship to a team that was just loaded. You just ran into a good team, it is what it is.
He beat the coach who's number 1 on this list, Kirby Smart, in a head-to-head matchup.
He's beaten Dabo Sweeney head-to-head.
That's right. He's beaten him head-to-head.
Beaten James Franklin head-to-head.
Beat James Franklin in a head-to-head in the semifinal. So I think that his spot is much more earned because of the fact that you had multiple rounds, like deeper rounds of the college football playoff compared to what DeBoer had, winning 1 game essentially to get to a championship game.
You had to beat 3 really good teams to make it to the national championship, And there's probably people who would argue that Cignetti belongs on this list in some capacity.
Stymie says no love for Belichick. Andrew says the turnaround DeBoer did at Washington was unreal. Jimmy Lake sucked. Again, like, I know the roster at Alabama wasn't as good as what Nick Saban had, and I've said time and again that just because it's Alabama doesn't mean that Kalen DeBoer was going to come in and, be in the playoffs and win championships right away. But he was coming off coaching in a national championship game, had the same quarterback Nick Saban had a lot of the same players still that Nick Saban had, and they were left out of a 12-team playoff.
You can make the argument that he stepped into a better roster.
Yeah, than what he had at Washington. Yeah.
All around.
Maybe
considered.
Like the quarterback and the number 1 receiver, Penix and Medunze. I was going to say the guy with the Bears, but
they look at the freshman that they had this year. That you can't tell me he's not. He might not be as mature as Rome Medunze, but he's still the top, probably top 2 wide receiver in the country.
Yeah. As Outbound said, he did get boat raced in the national championship game. That is a fact. DK asks, if Urban came back, where does he rank?
He'd have to be in the top 10, unfortunately. As crappy as a person he is, doesn't take away from what he can do as a head coach in college.
Still won national championships at
Multiple.
Multiple schools. That's right. Fill in the blank. The best head coach who will never win a national championship is blank.
Brian Kelly. I'm serious.
He was my initial thought, but I'll go with his counterpart and I'll say James Franklin.
Because you look on paper.
Unless we're going to concede that Brian Kelly is the better coach than James Franklin, then in that case, okay, we would have to go Brian. Do you think Brian Kelly is a better head coach than James Franklin?
Oh, I think they're so similar. It hurts.
I know. Like it's crazy how similar they are. I don't think you can go wrong with either answer.
I think they're literally like 1A and 1B. But on paper, Brian Kelly's overall record is 292 and 107. You know, like that's a crazy winning percentage at the college level. He's 29 and 11 at LSU, which isn't great for LSU standards, but it's like not horrible for SEC country when you're playing that schedule every year.
Yeah.
So it's like, but of course his knock is you can't win the big one. And so if you're telling me who's a great coach that's not going to win the national championship, I watched it for a lot of years. His name is Brian Kelly.
I can't disagree. I mean, he moved to LSU to put himself closer to winning a national championship, and he's farther away now than he's been in a long time, really. At least the last 7 years since they first got to the playoff. So either way, but I would go Franklin as well, because I think that now granted, Notre Dame Penn State was a great, well-played, hard-fought, competitive game. It came right down to the wire, and obviously a big turnover at the end and a big field goal. You know, like we're splitting hairs. He very easily could have won that game and been in the national championship game himself. But I mean, I feel like what we saw from Franklin and Penn State last year was what kind of everyone said. It's like, okay, you're in the playoff now, but I don't think that I think that that's the ceiling for him.
And we are so fortunate that Notre Dame came back and won that game, because it allows us just to speak even more absurdly about James Franklin and have no remorse, because you can't make these kind of arguments if James Franklin beats Notre Dame and goes on to the national championship. So I think that's funny, first and foremost. But yeah, it's just, I didn't gain anything by watching James Franklin beat SMU and Boise State. I didn't.
Right. And that's the point, because of the way the thing was formatted, they didn't get a bye, but they got the next best thing with what their path looked like. He didn't have to beat Georgia to get there.
I mean, it showed, right? Yeah. Notre Dame was far less fresh in the first half, but when we could sit down and make adjustments, X's and O's, James Franklin was down in the hole again. He got out coached in a half of football when he had a half advantage, because Notre Dame had to play slugfest with IU in the cold and Georgia, the SEC champ, who couldn't throw the ball because their backup quarterback was in. So they were playing, a lot of heavy. It was a physical matchup, very physical matchup.
Right.
And then, in comparison, obviously Penn State gets SMU and Boise State. Like, it showed. But then he got out-coached when it really mattered the most.
Josh says Kelly won a title at Grand Valley State. Obviously, Division II does not count in this conversation.
Great trivia fact.
Andrew went deep, and Lance Leopold is not a bad answer.
No, he's not. But there's also, I think Josh Heupel's not a bad answer.
Yeah.
Who else do I think is not a bad? I think Eli Drinkowitz is yeah.
I think he's found his ceiling as well. Scale of 1 to 10. How important is Steve Angeli's experience in the quarterback competition with CJ Carr and Steve Angeli?
10 being incredibly important. I'd put this at a 2.1 out of 10. It has ultimately no relevance at the end of the day, because there is no experience. You played one bowl game that I think any quarterback could have probably started and had success, considering, what was departing from the team that they faced. And it was third and fourth strings a lot of the time. And it's not about experience at this point. When you're starting fresh, you got to go with the guy that's got the most talent and is going to provide the most juice to the offense. Angeli he can check boxes and make check downs and 10-yard crosses across the middle, but he's not dynamic on his feet. He doesn't have a deep down ball threat or downfield ball. He doesn't just have that electric, game-changing juice that could amplify a game that I think CJ Carr and Kenny Minchie could bring in comparison to Angeli.
I don't disagree with any of that. I mean, the guy has 245 career snaps. That's basically 4 games spread over 3 seasons with, like one full game. He got to play a full half a couple of different times because, there were blowout situations both at Purdue and the Tennessee State game. So he got, so like that's what, so that's what those 2 halves plus the Sun Bowl. That's 2 of his games right there, and everything else is just snaps spread across the rest of those 3 seasons. And a lot of people act like he's got some great,
track
he's
record.
got some great experience advantage on either of these 2 other guys. But what you said, like, he is not the most skilled of these guys. The arm talent is not the same. The intangibles are not the same. There's a lot of good things that Steve Angeli can do, but experience is not the thing that puts him over the top. And as I've said before, like, experience can be valuable, but it can also be vastly overrated. And I just feel like it is vastly overrated in this instance. And I've said this before, and I'm going to say it again right now. Jameis Winston and Johnny Manziel were Heisman Trophy winners as redshirt freshmen. They had 0 experience going into those seasons. Their second season in college, when they were redshirt freshmen, they became the starters. They won Heisman trophies that year. They led their teams.
Manning is going to
great
start
season.
next year.
Yeah, well, but he's got probably more valuable experience even than what Angeli has right now. So yeah, so you're 2.1. I'll put it at 1.9. Outbound says Steve is a Will Howard type QB. I don't see that at all.
I would not. That's
Will Howard can run. Like,
he's stockier. He's got a stronger arm.
He's got a bigger arm. Yeah. I don't see that. I don't see that analogy personally.
Respectively, no.
You're right. So Notre Dame beat Pittsburgh 55-54, men's basketball, first round of the ACC tournament today. What should be the goal for the Irish men this week at the ACC tournament?
To win tomorrow against North Carolina. I think that's
kind of my boat as well. Like,
let's be honest. I think if you win against North Carolina,
get that upset over a blue blood program in their home state. Feel good about yourself. You accomplished something. You won a couple games as a 13 seed at the ACC tournament, or the 12 seed, whichever one. Yeah, they were the 12 seed.
Yeah, beat North Carolina, look competent against Wake Forest, and if you beat Wake Forest, holy crap, that's like the cherry on top. But just look competent against Wake Forest if you get to that point.
Yeah, it just feels like that would be like for what this team has done this year, that would be an overachievement. Because, like, man, it's just like they just, I will give them this. They do play hard consistently. Like, I will give them the effort. But I mean, honestly, that's something that you should be praising with your youth team. Like praising.
That's what I tried. I tried to say run hard and everything will be all right. And everyone's just jogging.
But my point, now you know the frustration of a coach, Jesse, when you're trying to bring effort out of people, right? But that's my point. Is like, you shouldn't have to praise the effort of guys who are getting Division I scholarships and making NIL money and everything else. Like, that should definitely be a given. But man, they just don't shoot very well. It's just like.
So does that give you more confidence, though, that once they actually get some of these recruits in there that actually have more skills and like more more players like Marcus Burton are in there.
Yeah.
That just because the shots and looks are there, they're just not sinking them, you know?
Right.
And at
Exactly.
that point, I think it's more, as much as Shrewsbury wants to, blame me. It's not about the players. At the end of the day, that's why I respect him, because he knows it's about the players, but he's not going to openly say it like Brian Kelly would.
He's still taking it off the player. Yeah, that's exactly right.
He's taking it.
He's
to
not
the
throwing
chin.
the players under the bus. He's willing to take it on the chin because he's not worried about his ego.
Exactly, because he knows that it'll turn around.
That's right. That's exactly.
And that's why I hated this whole, his speech was fabricated or over the top, or it wasn't. I don't care, because at least he wore it to the chin for his players that he knows are underperforming. He watches the film. He watches the tape. He knows. End of my rant.
No, that's exactly right. Hey, let's not forget, NC State won 5 games in 5 days last year. They played in this first round of the tournament last year, made it all the way to the Final Four at the end of the season. Now, I'm not saying Notre Dame's going to make some miracle run, because, again, like to see them hit, better than 35% of their shots to feel good about them. But because the looks were there, they just, it's like, oof. But yeah, I mean, I agree. Beat North Carolina tomorrow, and I think that that would leave a pretty good taste in your mouth as a nice, then you'd have to play Wake Forest obviously the next day. But if you can beat North Carolina tomorrow, I feel like that would be a nice little capper for this team.
Wake Forest has all the pressure because they're not, this is a big year for them. They're not used to being a top 4 seed and having, success in the ACC, and they got the double bye and all that good stuff. Like, you get to that point and you start talking about what you were talking about with NC State, like anything can happen, especially when teams that aren't supposed to or normally in these situations start to feel the pressure a little bit of the situation. Notre Dame's won a couple games. Their feet are comfortable on the court. You could ride some momentum a little bit. That's what you just need to see. Just get on a little hot streak for one time and just take this thing out.
Get on a little heater, baby. Yeah. Come on now. Let it ride. Fill in the blank. Marcus Burton being named second team All-ACC after leading the conference and ranking second in the nation in scoring is blank.
It's bogus, to be honest with you. And, the thing is Burton missed that time, and I don't know if that played into this at all. But that was up front in the season. That was more, that had less impact on what we're talking about. And that's all ACC. He still played majority of the ACC season. And so how can the leagues, no matter how bad the team is, how can you not make – that's the whole point of all conference teams.
Now remember, this is voted on by coaches in the media. So it's not like the league is, saying this is your all conference team. This is voted on, just to clarify.
And so it's just, it's just bogus at the end of the day, because how can you not respect a guy? Like, where would Notre Dame be without Marcus Burton in some of these ACC contests? Like, that's the other flip side. Like, they already struggled, but like they would struggle a lot worse if it wasn't for Marcus Burton. And so, I find it to be bogus at the end of the day.
It's a big league, but the concentration of voters still the biggest concentration come from one place, and that is Tobacco Road. Like, Tobacco Road bias is real. 4 schools are in the state of North Carolina, and that's where the biggest concentration of the media is, and that's where they come from. What's odd to me, this is the first time since 2017 that the ACC's leading scorer did not make it on the first team. So that's been 8 years since the guy who led the conference in scoring wasn't first team. But what's odd to me is same conference, same sport, but the men are still doing 5 guys on the first team, 5 guys on the second team, then there's 5 guys on the third team, and then they have 10 on honorable mention. So that's 25 total players who are being honored, but they go 5, 5, 5, 10 honorable mention after that. The women have 15 players on the first team. The men have 5. Like, what sense does it make for the same conference, same amount of teams to be doing it that way, because a lot of these conferences, because of the fact that they're so big, like there should be at least 10 players with 18 teams. There should be at least 10 players on the first team on the men's side. The women have 15. So like, there's no excuse. Like why they're doing it this way just seems completely archaic to me. You can't keep adding teams, but have a first team of 5 players only. Like that is the biggest thing. You know, he came in 7th in the voting. I agree. He absolutely should have been up there, especially when you consider the fact that he's second in the freaking nation in scoring, not just leading the conference, but second in the nation. There's no reason he should be on the second team. It just makes zero sense.
I think your argument is what makes the even more just head scratching is, yeah, how do you add more teams, add more players to the pool, but you're not willing to cough up at least 2 or 3 more spots for the first team all conference?
Exactly. I mean, think about it. Now, I mean, like the Big Ten is still called the Big Ten, even though we all know there are not 10. There are many more than 10 teams in the conference. But most conferences, you know, like before it was the Big 12, it was the Big 8, and you know, like the Pac-10. You know, again, even though there were more, but you know, when Pac-10, Pac-12, it was Pac-8 before that. So like the average size conference used to be 10 teams. You know, kind of like right around 10 teams. And so it made sense that you only had like 5 players on a first team. But when you're pushing 20 teams in your conference, you need to expand what the first team is. There should at least be 10 players on the first team in the ACC. So Jess, there's been a frenzy of NFL free agent moves this week. Which one do you want to start with?
I think the one that is the most intriguing is Fields to the Jets.
I found that baffling that that the New York Jets with a new head coach, Aaron Glenn, like Justin Fields is going into his 5th season as an NFL quarterback. What has he shown that would say first time head coach, that's the guy I want to build my franchise?
See, that's what I mean. Are they actually making him the franchise quarterback? Are they just getting him as a just in case? If they draft a quarterback, are they going to play Fields and develop a drafted quarterback in the meantime? I don't know. I don't know. I think that one has a lot of questions about it, because how are you spinning this? What's the overall kind of plan or path forward? Is it because I think all of the options I just kind of got into are all on the table?
DK, of course, is trolling us right now with Cowboys stuff. But yeah. So I thought that was the biggest head scratcher. But you know, there were also the other quarterbacks that moved. Sam Darnold went to Seattle. Geno Smith to the Raiders. Daniel Jones.
That makes sense because Pete and Geno obviously.
Yeah, I mean that makes perfect sense. And then when that happened, the trade to the Raiders, it opened up a spot for Sam Darnold because it was looking like he was going to kind of be the odd man out.
So those two are like, you know, it is what it is. But if you want to get back into some of the I think Daniel Jones to the Colts is like, hey, Anthony Richardson, you better figure this thing out, or we're going to go with old reliable Daniel Jones here.
And that's crazy that you're bringing in Daniel Jones to compete for a spot with the guy that was supposed to be your franchise quarterback.
Like that's what you resort to at this point,
right?
You got to bring in Daniel Jones to push or motivate or challenge your quote unquote franchise quarterback.
That's right. John says the Steelers dropped the ball.
I don't agree with that though, because I like what they did with DK Metcalf, and now you got him, and I've heard maybe they're going to trade Pickens, and so what you could flip into that, or maybe you don't even trade them and you play them together, and you still have a really good defense, and then the Steelers themselves.
Who's playing quarterback though? Because
draft a quarterback.
Yeah, but they're going to have to trade up to get a franchise type guy.
Or that's what I mean. Do you maybe get like I don't know.
All the talk was, you know, because it sounds like Russell Wilson wasn't coming back, and all the talk was, well, you got Justin Fields. Are you going to sign Justin Fields? And the next thing you know, he signs with the Jets. Well, you don't have to say his name. I'll say it for you, because when asked what the best fit for Aaron Rodgers is, NFL Network analyst Michael Robinson said Rodgers' best fit is the recliner that he has in his big house. Do you buy or sell that?
I do buy that because Aaron Rodgers is out of his prime. And not only is he out of his prime physically, I think mentally he's out of his prime too. I don't think he cares about football nearly as much as he used to. Like he's not locked in, and football is not his life like it used to be. And he comes with so much extra baggage, the injuries. I don't think he's played competitive, serious football for going on almost 3 years now. And then the baggage he brings with him. And then, you're a big market. You're the Steelers. You just traded for Metcalf. You got a good defense. Like, it just sounds like a catastrophe waiting to happen. And not only with the Steelers, just anywhere else. It's not worth the baggage, and he's not near as good, and he's not near as committed as he used to be.
I agree. There's a reason that the Jets didn't want him back. And, I know that, there was all that stuff out there, where the Jets told him, look, if you're willing to give up going on Pat McAfee every week, we can talk about it. Now there's, disputes as to how, serious that was and everything else. But I believe it because it just feels like he's interested in things other than actually playing football.
He wants to be controversial at this point.
At the age that he's at, he either needs to start a podcast or, just retire and get hired by one of the networks, because one of them would snatch him up because he's Aaron Rodgers and he likes to talk and people would be talking about him.
Yeah, I mean, he loves to listen to himself, and there's people out there who want to listen to what he has to say.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Like DK said, maybe it's all the hallucinogens getting to him.
Ayahuasca?
Ayahuasca.
A little ayahuasca. Joseph asked earlier, I don't know if Joseph's still hanging out, what team wins the women's basketball national championship? He says, as much as I hate to ask, do you think South Carolina wins another title?
Don't you think it's like pretty wide open in terms of probably like 8 to 10 teams that could?
It's my thought exactly. You literally, as I was thinking about this, took right from my thought bubble. I think that there are like 8 to 10 teams who all have legitimate, because like when you look at it, they've all beaten each other.
Yeah.
Like Notre Dame, obviously, with the wins over UConn, Texas, and USC. USC beat UCLA twice. UCLA just turned around and beat USC in the Big Ten championship game. UConn's beaten USC. And again, Notre Dame
thumped South Carolina.
UConn. Right. And
South Carolina has stumped some other people.
Texas and South Carolina have split their games. And I agree with what Andre's saying. It's all about the matchups. And that's like we'll talk about it next Monday after the bracket comes out, obviously, and kind of see how things look. But I think it's very wide open, and I don't think you can, as much as everyone's hand wringing about Notre Dame, I don't think you can write them off just yet, because they have obviously shown that they can compete with those elite teams and beat those elite teams. They just have to get it figured out again and see what things look like. Andre wants to know if we're doing the bracket. I mean, we can. We didn't put anything up for it last year, put anything on it last year. But we can do some.
You want me to organize an IB breakdown bracket challenge?
Sure.
All right.
Men's and women's?
Men's and women's.
All right.
All brackets must be submitted to me, and I will hand calculate all of the scoring.
All right.
Well, I'll have an Excel sheet, but yeah.
Yeah, but so I don't want that to sound like a cop-out, but I really think that.
No, I think it's a good thing. I think women's basketball, there's usually every year you're like, these 3, maybe 4 teams could win it, but this year it feels more open.
And honestly, with what UConn did to South Carolina a couple of weeks ago, like UConn might be the favorite right now, just based on how they're playing. They've only got 3 losses.
So Joe said ceiling floor for Notre Dame women's team. I think ceiling national championship floor Elite 8.
I think so.
I don't. They can't lose in the 16 again this year.
I mean, I want to see what the bracket looks like. Because I saw a projection the other day where they were a 2 seed and TCU was a 3 seed in the same region. And that would be a matchup in the Sweet 16. So
Be some sweet revenge.
yeah, I mean, so like you could get that kind of, matchup. It's going to depend on what the bracket like, so like I would say, yeah, I still say ceiling national championship, floor Sweet 16, Elite 8, again, like depending on what the draw looks like and who the matchups are. Because as of right now, the best they're going to be is a 2 seed. And like Vince and I were saying yesterday, there's not a whole lot of difference between a 2 and a 3 as opposed
you're gonna
to
play each
a
other
1
in
and a
the
2.
16s.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, my point is they can't be a 1 seed at this point. So the draw is going to look a little bit different just based on that. But Sunday night, Selection Sunday.
Sunday.
Yeah, baby. All right, well, that's going to do it for tonight. Appreciate you being here. And hit that like button before you leave. We always appreciate it when you do that. Jesse will work on getting those bracket challenges put together. And we
I
will
gotta
talk
win
to
a
you.
game tonight first, all right?
Okay, Coach. All right, let's go. Let's see some effort.
Man, maybe I gotta get out there and run sprints to start practice or something.
Might be a good idea.
Get the people fired up.
Get it going. Get the blood flowing. Coach is working. We got to work too. Talk to you later on IB Nation Sports Talk.